You know, I got a nasty phone call on Sunday, nasty shock. John Roskam ringing to say he was going to quit as head of the Institute of Public Affairs. And that's, well, I consider the real blow. He can tell you how I wailed and yelled at him, because there are not many people, and there are even fewer organisations that dare to fight here for freedom, for libertarian and conservative values. Most businesses now, they run a mile. Too scared. Most liberal politicians, if they had a conviction, they've got even less fight. Now, news organisations like The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald, The Guardian, don't have a single on-staff conservative columnist, which makes things worse. The ABC, not a single conservative or libertarian host of main current affairs shows. It's like a desert out there. But then there's been John Roskam, who's been huge in the culture wars, massive. He actually built the IPA from down here to way up there. Never had more members, even though business donations have shrunk to next to nothing, that cowardice again. He's got huge support instead from the public. More money than ever, record funding. Now, under Roskam, the IPA has also got two of its staff into federal parliament, James Patterson and Tim Wilson, and Louise Stady into Victorian parliament. John Roskam joins me now. John, I'm not going to start whinging again at you and start saying you're terrible and you let us down, etc., but why have you quit?
Hello, Andrew. Great to be with you. I'm sorry that I upset your Sunday afternoon, but I did want to tell you, as such a wonderful supporter of our work and of freedom in Australia, that after 17 years I wanted to continue the fight for freedom in a different way, to step down as Executive Director, but continue as a full-time Senior Fellow at the IPA, because Australia needs to understand, and Australians need to understand, the values of freedom, of our liberties, of equal opportunity in a way that we've never needed to before. And I want to continue the fight, but in a different way, because exactly as you just said, we have many challenges in front of us.
In fact, you gave an interview in today's Financial Review, and I got to say, I put it down with an even heavier heart, because you suggested we've lost the culture wars. Why do you say that?
Well, Andrew, I'm not sure that we lost, but I think we are at risk of losing. When I started at the IPA 17 years ago, the centre-right, quite understandably, was focused on economics, as we must. But we assumed freedom of speech would always exist. We assumed that there would always be equality under the law, regardless of our ethnicity or our racial background. We assumed that the Western civilization, was a force for good and has been a force for good, notwithstanding many challenges over the past. And it seems that in the last 4 or 5 years, very quickly, all of this has been taken away. The idea that just earlier this year here in Melbourne, 15-year-old boys in a government school could be told to stand up because they're white and male and Christian is just completely un-Australian. And then, of course, on top of that, you have the pandemic and things like Australians not being able to leave our country. Now, North Korea might do that, but not a democratic country like Australia. And exactly as you said, I don't think there's enough people starting to understand what's at risk. But you also do now have mainstream Australians seeing what's happening around them. So on the weekend here, we had protests against what Daniel Andrews is trying to do, such as basically lock up people without the right of appeal if a health official thinks they could be any threat to the public whatsoever. Those were bigger protests than under the Vietnam War. So we haven't lost yet. We need to keep on fighting, but we need to understand what Ronald Reagan said, which is every generation must fight for its own freedoms. And we are in a fight for our lives right at the moment.
Yeah, but when you first joined the IPA, businesses were still a few, still in the fight, and probably got, 70% of your donations were from business. Now it's shrunk to, 5% or something. Back then we had, and earlier we had people the people who ran the Mudgeonbury abattoirs, people who ran Fred Stewart at Dollar Sweets Company. You had people at Western Mining, Hugh Evans, Hugh Morgan, and the great Avi
Hugh
Parvo,
Morgan and Ray Evans, yes.
The lamented Ray Evans, real thinkers, really joining in this culture war. Now we've got almost nobody. Gina Reinhardt, well, apart from that, I'm struggling here. Help me out. What happened?
Well, exactly as you say, Andrew, someone like Gina Reinhardt is one of the very few business leaders who will stand up and say, capitalism is good, enterprise is good, the private sector is important. We now have business more afraid of the left. We have business that does not defend its job in creating wealth, in creating opportunity. But it's not just business. We have so many institutions that seem to not just dislike, but in some cases actively discourage a hatred, a disdain for the things that have made us the greatest society in the world, the best country in the world, which is Australia. All of these things are being lost. It's not just our business institutions, it's our government institutions, it's our churches, it's our cultural institutions. You can't go to a sporting event now without being preached at, but you're preached at not about equality, not about democracy, but about how we should be divided by our race. And there's not enough leaders.
It's so true.
And it's always been the case that, in fact, leadership will come from mainstream Australians, from the people who are out in the streets, not from people in the boardrooms of Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane and Perth.
You're right to say the church leaders, but I guess every church leader has seen what they did to George Pell, and they don't want some of that themselves. He was a giant, and they cut him down. Just quickly, running out of time, the Morrison government has been absent from the culture wars. Now, finally, just before an election, found a tiny will to fight. First, it's just backed an inquiry into how the ABC handles complaints about its bias and fake news. Now it says it's going to try again to get up a religious freedom bill. Are you impressed by that bit?
Well, it's better late than never from the Morrison government, but we haven't seen the bill. But I still have very substantial concerns, and this goes to what we've just been talking about. We have an entire culture that disdains organised religion and disdains Christianity deliberately. And it might be that this legislation, if it's passed, makes the situation worse, because we don't want to have judges deciding what is religion, what is legitimate, what is not. And it's also the case that people should be able to express their views, regardless of their political views, their religious beliefs. We don't want to say one form of speech is protected, but another form isn't. So I've got concerns that until we actually see the black and white letters of the legislation, we risk making the situation worse and giving more power to judges, more power to government tribunals, more power to authorities to decide what we can say and what we can think. And there are concerns about
so this. True. You watch for the buts. You watch for the buts. Well, you've got freedom of religion except for but. John Roskam, you've been a great man. Thank you so much for your time.